Hey there, and welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. It is my pleasure to share with you a podcast I just did. And guess what? I get to talk about me. It was a focus on me and my story, and I'm sure there's probably a nugget or two that's in there that might benefit you.
My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. TJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com. Oh, if you dreaming it, believing it, work hard for it, and in the process serve others in a positive way. Think you can do it.
Yeah, I was privileged to join Patrick Snow's podcast. What a joy it was. He asked me if I would come on and share some of my philosophies, my story, and so forth. And that's exactly what I did, which was a joy for me because I'm normally interviewing other people, and this time I was the one being interviewed. So this is really cool. By the way, if you're listening to this, hey, just recognize that we interview thought leaders, high-performing athletes, best-selling authors, business leaders, and so forth. And I try to bring them to you to give you tools and insights that can help you go to the next level and get the slight edge. So I hope you join my podcast, Unleash Your Greatness Within, or follow me at greatnesswithin.com and so forth. You can find all the information about me and my social links and everything at greatnesswithin.com. Without any further ado, let's jump right into this interview with Patrick Snow.
Welcome everybody, this is Patrick Snow, host of the Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series, where we interview inspiring authors, speakers, coaches, and consultants and entrepreneurs from all over the world to help us get what we all want. And that is more time, more money, more freedom, more health, more love, more happiness in life. Today, I want you to buckle up your chin strap, put your seatbelt on, get your shoes and socks on. We are in for an exciting interview. We've got a longtime friend of mine from 20 years we've been buddies and friends. His name is TJ Hoisington. And if you want to follow along online, you can go to his website, greatnesswithin.com. Again, greatnesswithin.com. I've been looking forward to this interview ever since Mary booked this. And I'm going to read you his bio here as we begin. So TJ Hoisington is a professional keynote speaker, an international best-selling author, an authority in the area of personal development, high performance, and leadership. He has written several books, including the international bestseller, If You Think You Can. And also his second most popular book is the book, The Secret of the Slight Edge. TJ is the host of the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast, which has reached #1 on Apple Podcasts. As part of this podcast, he interviews leaders from all over the world on the area of high achievement in leadership. TJ has given more than 1,000 keynote speeches around the world, helping people and organizations unleash their greatness within, which has recently been trademarked. TJ lives with his wife and his 4 children and 2 grandchildren in the Puget Sound area of the state of Washington. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our special guest, Mr. TJ Hoisington.
Love it, love it, love it. I'm so excited to be here. Patrick, thank you guys, all of you, for thinking of having me on your show. This is really a treat for me, so I look forward to the interview. This is awesome.
Well, it's been 20 years, I think, since we first met. And take us back to the beginning. I'm trying to figure out how we connected way back when. And I've always been impressed with you. You're one of the most inspirational, most positive, full of love and light inspiration that I know. So when you cleared your calendar to do this, I was so excited. So how did we connect back in the day?
So back in the day, well, let me take you a little further back. Maybe some people don't know this. So I came from a military family. I'm an Army brat. And there were 8 kids in my family. And you can imagine that financially, I always remember it was a little bit tight. It was on the tighter side, given the big family that we had and so forth. And I remember one day, I was 15 years old. I walked into my parents' bedroom, And I went to his dresser to find some loose change, hoping that I could go buy some juju beans or some other candy at the grocery store. But that day there was no change or dollar bill or anything on the desk. But there was a cassette tape. And now today, a lot of people don't know what cassette tapes are, but in the old days, there were cassette tapes. And I remember I picked it up out of curiosity because someone had given it to him. And I picked it up and I read the title standing there in his bedroom at 15 years old. And it said, "The Day That Turned My Life Around." And on the other side, it said, "How to Live Financially Independent." Well, both those titles intrigued me. So I remember taking it, I put it in my pocket. I went upstairs later that night with my yellow Sony Walkman, if people remember what Walkmans are. And I laid on my bed with my brother Steve on the top bunk. I was on the lower bunk, and I laid there and listened to this man on this tape speak about success and about lifestyle and so forth. It was a tape by a man by the name of Jim Rohn. And so maybe some of your listeners might know who that is, a legendary thought leader in the area of performance and living and so forth. And Jim Rohn taught me that I could think bigger than I could have ever dreamed possible. He got me to think out of the box. He got me to read. I didn't read my first book until I was a junior in high school because I didn't believe I could read. And he got me to do things beyond my natural cap on my container. He got me to reach more of my potential. But it was in those moments when I listened to that tape 20 times the first month, I had this thought in my heart, actually, TJ, you should be a motivational speaker and one day an author, and you could change the world one person at a time. And I remember laying there thinking that. And my brothers would make fun of me. Like, why would you listen to a tape over and over and over? Because I listened to it 20 times a month. Well, the rest is history in a sense. That led me to read my first book. I read my second book. My first book was The Adventure of Leadership by the founder of the North Face Company called his name is Hap Klopp. And that is a great book. And then it led me to my second book, Les Brown, Live Your Dreams. I read that book, and it took me on a whole different trajectory, this personal development, this learning that we can think bigger and we can tap more of our potential, that we all have enormous capacity and intelligence and potential that oftentimes through life is conditioned to use less than our true nature. And so I at that point, I ended up going on a mission for 2 years to Taiwan. So I do speak a little Chinese. And then I got back and I thought, okay, I need to learn from one of the best. And at that time, and it probably is still today, well, between that, we started a company when I got back, and that did really well. But then while I was working for the company, I thought, I'm not building my dream of being a speaker and an author and so forth. And one thing I learned from Tony Robbins, listening to his tapes, is, hey, listen, you can try to figure it out on your own and, and fail and do better and so forth, or you can learn from other people that have done it. And I thought, what's the best way to get a head start on this career? And it was to work for Tony Robbins. And so I went and called Tony Robbins, and this was in 1999. They hired me immediately. I spent a year with Tony Robbins, training all around the United States, and I got the best education, the best training I could ever get, because my job was to go into companies and sell them to his seminar. Well, what did that mean? That meant in 1 year, I gave over 240 presentations, keynote speeches in different companies. And I tell you what, I learned a lot. I made a lot of mistakes too, right? You learn as you go and so forth. But I figured it out. And then I got to a point, I was sitting in Tony Robbins' seminar, and he said this phrase: when would now be a good time to live your dreams? When would now be a good time to take action or do that thing that you've always wanted to do? And my wife was with me. I'm an employee at that time with Tony Robbins, but they would gift us the opportunity to go through the seminar ourselves. I nudged her. I said, honey, it's time for me to leave. At that point, I gave my 2 weeks notice and I left the company and I called my parents and I said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to leave the Tony Robbins organization. I'm going to start my company. I'm going to do my first seminar up in Seattle, Washington at the Marriott Hotel. Actually, it was Fife, Tacoma. I was going to do my first seminar. And I said, listen, our home in Utah is being rented out because I was traveling with Tony Robbins. Is it okay if we stay in your house with my, at that point, 2 children who were really young? Can we stay in your house for 2 months? I'll do a seminar in Tacoma. I'll do a seminar in Seattle. And after that, I'll be on my way. Everything will go great. They said, no problem. So we moved up to Washington and we moved into their basement, which is really a studio apartment. It walks outside at the bottom. So, but there was just 1 bedroom. And my kids had to sleep in a closet that had the laundry room in there and so forth, in their crib and so forth. It was a tough time. Well, long story short, for all you listeners that are hearing this story, those 2 months turned into 5 years. It was a painful experience. My wife was frustrated. She came to a point where she didn't realize we would have to go through this when we were first married, but she had a shift in her thinking at one point when she stormed out of the house one day and she took her journal with her, of all things, and she wrote in her journal everything that she was grateful for. And I still have that letter today. Well, no, but she did. So then she said, TJ, maybe you should go get a job. Out of all the stress, you should go get a job. And I said, I'm willing to go get a job. I've tried all these other things. I tried to do the seminars, but I was losing money. I was going into debt and it just wasn't working. And then I said, honey, before I go get a job, I am going to write a book. And she looked at me like, what are you thinking? You are crazy. And she was really actually upset with it, Patrick, because she had never seen me do something like that before. She wrote me a 4-page letter that said, are you sure? But she says, I believe in you if you really feel strong about this at the end. Well, that's comes into time when I met you, Patrick. Because
and this was 2002, 2003, 2004 timeframe?
It was probably the beginning of 2004. And so it was at that point, my back is against the wall. We had 2 cars at the time. One was repossessed one night at 2:00 in the morning or something off my parents' property. And in it were 200 sets of the Power to Shape Your Life 6 CD set that I was selling at the time, and which is still powerful. I have a testimony of that program today. The principles that are in there, they still are real today. You can't get it. It's not out there. I thought about redoing it, but they took all those CD sets that I had put together by hand with the sticker on the CD and everything, and it just
take the car but leave the CDs, right?
Yeah, like take the car and leave the CDs, please, right? They took everything. And my wife, that's about the time she wrote the letter, like we are really moving backwards fast, and she was stressing. And so that's when I said, I'm going to write a book. And we only had 1 car. Summertime was coming up. I decided to take, because the kids weren't in school yet, I said, I'll take the car. I'll go down to the grocery store parking lot a mile down from the house so I could have some solitude. I sat in the back seat of the car with my old titanium Apple laptop and a few books next to me. And I just started typing. I just flowed. And in 2 months, I wrote, If You Think You Can. And then at the end of that, I thought, hey, I got to get some endorsements, like from Patrick and other. I said, I need to get some endorsements. So I printed off 20 manuscripts, 3-ring binder that I could send out to people like Brian Tracy, like Hap Klopp, like Charlie Tremendous Jones, like there's several others, like Hiram Smith or Ken Blanchard, all of them. I sent them. And you wouldn't believe it. I sent 20 manuscripts out, and within 6 weeks, I got 19 endorsements back. I was blown away. And that's when I didn't know what to do. I had a book, I had, endorsements, but I didn't know how to publish it. And it just so happened, I don't know how we connected, Patrick. Maybe it was my brother Steve or something. What was the connection?
I think it was something to do with prepaid legal or some connection there.
Which is now Legal Shield. Yeah, so it was probably Legal Shield. I might have been speaking at a Legal Shield thing, and maybe you were speaking there too. Something we connected. And by the way, you'll remember at that time, we both spoke on stage with Brian Tracy. You remember that, Patrick?
Yep.
Yeah. And we went to lunch with him afterwards. Do you remember that?
This was in Mercer Island.
Yeah, it was up in Mercer Island. Well, yeah. So I met you, and I thought, and somehow you said, hey, I help people get their books published. I was like, oh, this is awesome. So the beautiful thing about Patrick, is you help me understand the pieces of the process. I'm a pretty kind of a guy that you give me the seeds of it or the roots of it, I will figure it out. And that's what you gave me was you got to get it printed. You got to have an ISBN number. You've got to, you've got to have a printer to go to and so forth. And you, thankfully, provided all that for me to get started. But long story short, so we don't go too long here, is that book within 9 months became an international bestseller. It sold almost 100,000 copies in the first year. So that's kind of the gist of it.
So here we are 20 years later. You've traveled all over the world speaking. You've done consulting all over the world. You're a sought after coach. Your podcast, Unleash the Greatness Within, is the #1 Apple podcast. And so today, do you primarily speak or coach or consult or write books? What's your primary role today? Because I'm sure you do a little bit of all of it.
So in the early days, I was doing a lot of speaking engagements. And that was great. But it was also difficult because I was trading time for money. And I guess we all do that to some degree. But I happened to get in contact with a guy named Bob Mowat, if any of you listening recognize this name. And he took me under his wings and he said there might be a better way. We do corporate consulting. And so I shifted from doing all the motivational stuff in the public place and I shifted into the corporate place. And so I would say for the last 20 years, I've primarily been inside companies on a private basis, working with employees, working with leaders to help develop them, to create thriving cultures and operations. So that's really where most of my focus goes, for sure.
You taught me a Bob Mowat quote 20 years ago that has severely impacted my career in a huge way. I don't know if you remember this, but you taught me this quote. Bob Mowat said this: when you speak, business happens.
Yep.
And that quote that you told me, and another one of my clients that used to work for him told me that completely changed my life.
Really?
So just quickly before we move on, what did Bob Mowat as a mentor, what did he mean to your life?
Amazing. There was a time when I was working for him before podcasts were even there weren't even podcasts. It wasn't even something that was known of. You would just do interviews on cassettes or CDs, right? I said, hey, Bob, because in the year 2000, he contracted or whatever. They found out he had cancer, a very rare form. They had tried stem cell on him and so forth. It just was not working. They thought he would only have about a year to live. He ended up living 7 years at that point, from 2000, 7 years to 2007. And early on in those early years, I thought, hey, I'd love to interview you, Bob. And this gives you a spirit of Bob. He said, no problem. Why don't we do an interview next Tuesday at 4:30 when everybody leaves the office, or 5 o'clock when everybody leaves the office? I said, awesome. So I went to some rental place. I got 2 microphones. I had my computer, that old titanium computer, sitting on the side with the software that records the audio. And we started the interview, and it was amazing. I asked him about his background, his stories, what his core beliefs are, blah, all these different things. And lo and behold, 45 minutes into the interview, I looked over at my computer and realized I never pushed the record button. I was blown away. My face turned red, and I just acted like nothing had happened, and we continued the interview. We ended it. He shook my hand. He says, I look forward to hearing it when it's all out. And I said, no problem, sir. Well, then I went home and I had a heavy heart. And then the next week, I had to come up to him and say, listen, I forgot to push the record button. And he tapped me on my shoulder and he said, no problem. There'll be another time to do it. And I said, I'm sorry, sir. He said, no problem. It's fine. Well, take that. I haven't shared this often. Take that 7 years later, or probably 6 years later from that point. He decided to write a book. And he said, TJ, would you help me write that book? Because If You Think You Can had already been out and done well. He said, would you help me write the book? I said, absolutely. And that happens to be The Secret of the Slight Edge. Well, 2 weeks after starting to write it, I would go over to his house every Wednesday, and I would turn on the recorder and we would write and talk and so forth. But 2 weeks after we started that process, we would do it in his home. His lungs collapsed and he was rushed to the hospital. They sent him to the hospital after a week. He was on a ventilator. He couldn't breathe. And so it was in his will that if he couldn't survive from this coma, that the family could choose to unplug the ventilator or whatever it was. And they called all of us that were associated with the company and friends and said, come over on Friday. We're going to pull the plug. We're going to pull the plug on Saturday. So a lot of people came by on Friday. I remember seeing him lay there unconscious. I grabbed his hand, told him I loved him, rubbed his hand. And I went home and I felt kind of melancholy, that I was never going to see him again. It didn't have anything to do with the book. The book is secondary to this. Well, they pulled the plug on Saturday, and you wouldn't believe it. They pulled the plug and he started to breathe on his own. I get a call next Wednesday and it's Bob that calls. Hey, TJ, it's Mo Bob. Hey, will you come and will you get over here so we can finish writing this book? I said, Bob, is that really you? And he said, it's me. I'm a cat. I got 9 lives. I'm still around. He said, I said, this is amazing. So I ended up going for the next couple months on Wednesday, I think it was, every week. And we would write, and I'd have that microphone next to him. So when you imagine this opportunity, he had some foresight, some opportunity of being able to record him again and then have it come out in a book. And I will tell you, we got toward the end of the book, and he was supposed to speak at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, but he couldn't. He was laying in bed. He was bed-stricken after the coma 24 hours a day. He laid in a hospital bed in his family room. And they said, could you send TJ in your place? So I went and spoke to the executive team there as a young TJ, and it was awesome. But I went and spoke, but on the way, I said, I'll take the manuscript, or I'll drop the manuscript off. You look at it, see if you have any corrections, and then I'll pick it up on my way back from the airport. He said, no problem. So I drove to the airport. I dropped it off. I went to the airport. I spoke, was there for a couple days, and then I came back, called him up, and went to see if there's any changes. He says, nope, everything looks great. And that next day, he passed away. I was just humbled by that, but the business and the partners in the business agreed that book had been finalized. we should still get it out. So we did. So that's sort of the story there. Bob was really impactful to me. He says, when you're green, well, it was Ray Kroc. He always quoted Ray Kroc of McDonald's. When you're green, you're growing. When you're ripe, you rot, right? And he would also say, limitations are mental and self-imposed. And I just believe that from my childhood, that those limitations we place on ourselves are really self-imposed. We don't realize it, but they are self-imposed. So until we expand our awareness, we don't know it. So that's the long answer to that.
Wow. Amazing. What an incredible opportunity. What an incredible man. And I actually never met him, but everything that I learned from you and another guy, Mark Madison, you probably know Mark Madison.
Totally.
I think you guys work together there.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yep.
When you speak, business happens. So true. Thank you, Bob, for that amazing quote. Okay, let's go back to your first book. If you think you can, you talk about laws. You say that by playing certain laws, you are guaranteed success. So talk about some of these laws and why it guarantees your success.
Okay, so what I'm going to say, at 50 years old, I still agree those 13 laws are still applicable today. So what I was saying then is still true. And what I would say is, when I was studying If You Think You Can and wrote the book in 2 months, and I'll pause here to say, my other books I've written have not happened in 2 months. They've happened in about a year's time, just so I keep it clear. I'm not a fast, prolific writer. I'm a thoughtful writer, so it slows me down, and I have to think through everything in detail, which is not natural for me, I don't think. And so, but If You Think You Can, my back was against the wall. I had to make things happen. And one thing I did was I studied all, like 200 years, books that had been printed around success, like Think and Grow Rich, The Magic of Thinking Big, and others even before that all talked about success. And as I read all those books, I noticed some patterns. And I found that there were 13 that kept popping up. And my argument was at the time, and it still is today, that if you're missing one of these 13 laws, you are limiting your potential to achieve results. And so that's really what it is. And the reason I landed on law is because laws are never changing. Laws are consistent. Laws are universal. They work. Now, we live in a world today, I'm going to be kind of bold here, but we live in a world today that's trying to take some of those core principles or those core laws and change them or make them fit a trend. And I would argue that those laws still work and have to be applied. And so I think you're safe when you focus on universal principles instead of getting into the weeds of laws or trends and so forth. So I try to stick with laws. And if you apply those laws, and there are other laws as well, but if you apply them, they do have an intern blessing or reward when you follow that law. So that's sort of my thought about law.
Can you give us a sample of some of your favorite laws from your book?
One of them is work on yourself. And it kind of goes back to Jim Rohn when he would always say, work more on yourself than you do your job, right? And the whole idea was, most people live, let me see if I can remember it right now. Most people live this mindset: have, do, be, and they wonder why they're not successful. Have, do, be, instead of what I learned all these years was be, do, have. It's the law of the harvest. And the law of the harvest has 3 laws to it. If you want to write this down or take notes to it, there's 3 laws. And they go back the law of the harvest goes back thousands of years. And here's the law of the harvest. Law number 1, you reap what you sow. What you put out, you're going to get returned. Number 2, you reap more than you sow. So you get more. So I live up in the Northwest, and we have big fir trees that can grow, 100 feet tall, but they can get really round, So you're telling me this is what is increased results, or just increased results, which is you can take a tiny little seed in the ground and you can nourish it and it can grow to this huge fir tree. That's increased returns. So you put energy out, you get multiplicity of returns back if it's positive, and if you're laser focused, the universe will give you more than the effort you put out. When you plant corn, you get a lot of corn back, okay? That's increased returns. Here's the tough one for most people, particularly probably in the United States. And that is, the third law is delayed gratification. Delayed gratification. We see all those, news stories or whatever, where people were able to have instantaneous success and so forth. But that's very rare when that happens. Understand, be patient and don't give up until. Don't give up too early. Many people throw the towel in when they don't realize it, but they're at the 5-yard line. And the universe doesn't wait until it knows you're surely and 100% committed. And when you're totally committed, that door will open. You just don't get to determine the time, but it will open. I promise that.
Mm-hmm. Furthermore, you talk about in your books and your speaking, 3 things that the mind can determine whether you succeed or fail. What are those 3 things the mind does that can determine whether you succeed or fail?
Okay, this could be related to anything, emotional pain, emotional pleasure. It could be related to having the right perspective to go into an opportunity, to have the right perspective. The brain does 3 things constantly. We're doing it as you listen to me. You do it 1,000 times during the day. And that is this: information comes into the conscious mind, and then we filter it. We filter it in 3 ways. We delete information, we distort information, and we generalize information. So, what does that mean? We delete information. I could have everybody look at something blue in the room and then close their eyes. And while their eyes are closed, tell them, hey, what did you see that was red? And most people and most of my audiences will struggle to come up with what was red. Why? Because you deleted every other color out except for the color I called on, which was blue. And if you didn't have the ability to delete information, the things people say, the noises over here, that kind of a thing, if we didn't have the ability to delete naturally as a human, we would go stark raving mad. We'd go crazy. So we have a natural ability to delete information. Number 2, we distort. We tend to blow things out of proportion, and we tend to shrink some things. People that typically maybe get down on themselves, maybe get a little bit depressed, what do? They tend to shrink the good of the situation and blow the bad out of proportion. What do the optimists do? They shrink the bad and they blow the good out of proportion. So the key is listen, Tony Robbins would always say, see things as they are, but see them better than they are. What most people do is they see things as they are, but they see them a little worse than they are. That's not what you want to do. So when you distort something, usually you're doing it because you have self-interest in a certain angle or a certain result or something. And sometimes it can be a positive distortion. Just know that you're always distorting, and then choose the way you think or you picture something or the way you interpret it in your head. And then the last one is generalization, right? We get in trouble with generalization, but it's also a good thing, right? The bad thing would be all men are, or all women are. Whereas in life, in regular life, if I put you in a office room and I said, try to open that door, 100% of you would be able to open that door. Why? Because throughout your life, You have seen a variety of different doorknobs and so forth. You've learned how to open a door using a variety of doorknobs. So you could figure it out. That's generalization. So we tend to generalize things, but we have to be careful when we start saying always, never, those kinds of things versus being more specific sometimes. So we play this game in our mind, and I would argue that emotional pain is caused always. This is a tough one because I'm saying always, right? You always got to put a red flag up when someone says always, but emotional pain is caused when expectations are not met due to attachment. So when expectations are not being met is when we feel that we have loss, is when we feel upset, is when we get angry, right? So controlling how you interpret the world, when you go into your next challenge, figure out a way to make it a step forward rather than neutralize or a step backwards. And then you do that through those three ways. You delete information, you distort information constantly, and then you generalize information. I say use those tools. If it's already happening in the brain, use them to your benefit. And it might mean that people like you, with me and you, Patrick, how you helped me, I was stuck in those early days. And you were able to be a mastermind help for me to help make sure that I filtered appropriately, that you gave me that additional information that I didn't have at the time. And so that might mean that we have to reach out to people that know more than us and be humble to learn from them, as I was to learn from you, Patrick. And you learn. So those are the three apparatuses that our brain does right there.
Our guest today is TJ Hoisington, international best-selling author of If You Think You Can, and also The Secret of the Slight Edge, also the #1 Apple podcast, Unleash Your Greatness Within. If you want to follow along online, you can go to greatnesswithin.com. Again, greatnesswithin.com to learn more about he and his practice and his work. So TJ, I recently saw a social media post. And in your social media post, you said there's 3 words that you never say to family, friends, or loved ones. What are those 3 words and why are they so important?
Okay, first of all, if you think you can, right? So words matter. Behavior usually follows our thoughts and our words. And if you say certain words enough times, you will likely walk that path. Tony Robbins, I remember, memories coming to me. Tony Robbins would always say, you never even heard the phrase, I came from a dysfunctional family until 1980. Okay, interesting point, right? So when I first got married to my lovely wife, who I've been married to for 26 years, she's amazing. But we decided early on, as we were going to raise our family, there were going to be 3 words we would not use in our home. Number 1, depressed. We will not lightly throw the word around or the phrase around like, I feel depressed today. Why would you say that if that's not what you want? Bob Moawad taught me this related to that. Bob Moawad said, how many times have you driven down the road and you're stressed about a bill or a family issue or something else, and you're driving down the road stressing out of your mind about something, and your favorite song comes onto the radio. And he says, you start singing along in the car to your favorite song. Well, what happened to all the feelings? They all went away for 3 minutes. So what do we know from that? Number 1, we know that we can control our thinking by the input that we put in. Okay, so that's that. That's a little side note. So we decided, listen, if we don't want to get divorced, we don't want to make that part of our plan. And I get that people listening to this have a different view of this. And I know that people struggle in their marriage. And I do believe there are circumstances where divorce is appropriate, okay? Depending on circumstances. But for me and my wife, and hopefully in being a good leader for my children who are married, hey, let's be as committed as we can. And so we never threw around the term, even when we were upset with each other, well, maybe we should just get a divorce or depressed. We never threw around depressed. That's number one. Number two is divorce depressed. Divorce is divorce. We never in our anger threw around the word divorce. And so just keep that in mind. If that's not something that you want to happen, don't ever use that as a tool to inflict on your partner. Okay, so let's not.
You might have thrown around some shoes, but you just didn't throw around the word divorce.
Yeah, exactly. No, totally, Patrick. I mean, I've been upset before. My wife has been upset. I've never had to separate from the bed or anything, but there have been times that have been pretty stressful, right? Just trying to see eye to eye on things. But one thing we never did was throw that word out. So depressed, divorce, and then the last one, which was tougher for my kids because it's a hard replacement sometimes, is the word can't. It's the ugliest 4-letter word. We don't say the word can't. You can say, I'm not interested. You can say, I choose not to. Those are okay. But you're not going to just throw out, I can't do that. No, that's putting a cap on your container. We're not going to make that an opportunity. And you know what? It has served my kids well. It served me well. I mean, anyway, those are the 3 words. I mean, not saying can't led my son as a junior in high school to crush it in football. In fact, anybody can Google the name Bryce Hoisington and you'll see all of his stats on YouTube, on Google. And you know what? When he was a junior in high school, he decided as a running back, he was going to dominate in Washington State as the best running back there ever was in Washington State. Well, that was probably 8 years ago now that he did it. And he actually broke the statewide rushing record with, in one game, 573 yards in one game. And he also broke the number of touchdowns as a record. And those 2 records still hold true today in Washington State. I tell you how he was able to do it. We didn't allow them to say can't. We said work harder. We said go out there and hustle. And so what would he do all during the summer? He borrowed a sled from his school, put 35 pounds on it, and would do sprints at the local elementary school every day, so he could get his speed up. And you know what? He was able to accomplish that through hard work. It's the law of the harvest, right? Just goes back to the law of the harvest.
573 yards, how many touchdowns? This is one game. Right?
That was one game. I think that was the game he did 31 or 33 touchdowns.
For the season, he had 31 or 33.
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, it was for the season, 31 or 33. But in that game, I think he had 9 or something like that just in that game. But what he also broke that year, I don't know if it's still true today. Someone would have to look it up. But he broke the 10-game season record yardage with something like 6 yards shy of 3,000 yards. So he was running 300 yards a game on the average.
That might be a national, for the U.S., a record. So that's phenomenal. I remember those stories you were telling me back then. I wish I could have got to see him play.
Oh, man. Yeah, it was awesome.
Okay, let's talk about the 5 Ds related to goal setting and achieving your dreams. Because obviously you're teaching your kids this, and then look at the results. So what are your 5 Ds related to goal setting and achieving your goals?
Number 1, D, as in dog, D, is desire. And I'm not the first to teach that. Napoleon Hill, in his book, Think and Grow Rich, talked about desire. Conrad Hilton, he owned in Texas, in a small town in Texas, a small motel that wasn't doing very well. He told his wife, I'm going to go up to New York and be at the opening of the Waldorf Astoria, which was the brand new hotel up in New York City at the time. And he went up there and he was there for the opening ceremony. And then a day later, he found himself sitting in the open foyer area, just in awe of this building at the time. He went outside and he had a picture taken next to him with him up against the Waldorf Astoria black and white picture. And he took that picture home to his little office in that motel. He put that picture under his glass cover on his desk, and he stared at it for 15 years. And 15 years, he ended up owning the Waldorf Astoria. So what does that mean? Desire. He sat in that ballroom and he thought, what led me to, or he said, what will make the difference in my life? And he said, desire and dream big. That's what he said in his book, to dream big. His son said, well, you just have to pray. If you pray harder, everything will just come to you. Yes, that's part of it, but let's make sure that we put the effort behind it as well. And so dreaming big was really a big one for him. That's number one.
Is dream big number two, or is that still number one?
Nope. These are goal specific. So number one is drive. Hey, everyone, the way I teach is I'll share a principle and then I'll use an analogy or a story to back it up. So you just kind of have to flow with it. Sorry. So number one is desire. Number two is define. You've got to define what it is that you want. For example, it's like a leaf in the windstorm. That leaf can end up going anywhere, right? Until you define what it is you're going to go after, the mind does not have the ability to become a servo mechanism and actually find opportunities and resources that can help you achieve it. You got to define it. The next one is decide. You've got to make this is one of the principles, and if you think you can as well, you've got to make a true decision. You got to decide, I'm going to put my stake in the ground and I'm going to do this until. The next one is dwell. You got to dwell on it. In other words, you got to visualize it. You have to see the end in mind. You have to be able to picture yourself already as that successful person is, as though you are today. And then what do you do today? You act it out. You move until it becomes a habit. You act it out. And so is there a little bit of an imposter syndrome? Yes, but let me tell you something. After all these years, I meet 60-year-olds and 50-year-olds that still feel a sense of the imposter syndrome. I say, throw it away. Just be you. And if this is part of you trying to be a better person, just own it. Don't worry about if you're an imposter syndrome situation. Just go own it and be the best you can be. Right? Because you're in integrity, the best person you can be. And then the last one is drive. Nothing happens until you take action. And it's consistent action over time. Hugely critical.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. So all these books that you've written, all these speeches that you've given, the coaching, the consulting, what's your best advice for somebody that's trying to enter into the personal growth and development industry? And we all have our hardships, our challenges. We're unemployed, partly because we're unemployable. And then we don't know when our next paycheck is coming, but one way or another, we find a way to make it happen. So what's your best advice for anybody getting into this space of speaking, coaching, consulting? Maybe they're leaving the comforts of their guaranteed paycheck. What's the best advice you have for others in that situation? Because a lot of my clients are like, do I keep my job? Do I quit? Wherever else. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think practically, right? Two thoughts are going through my mind. If you've already left your job, congratulations, first of all. But you've got to keep your mindset sharp. You cannot get on that emotional roller coaster. So you got to be every day filling your mind with positive information. The associations that you're in and the people you're associating with have got to be positive and so forth. And you sometimes might think, well, my spouse or whoever is not very supportive. Well, maybe you don't need to share all your goals with them, but you need to be active in being around people that that do believe in you and so forth. So filling the mind will help filter the mind, okay? Filling the mind with positive material and so forth. If you have not left your job yet and you're thinking about leaving your job, that's a little tougher. Part of me is I would not leave your job, if we're being clear and practical, until you have burned the midnight oil enough that that is working so that you can leave your job and then catapult the momentum you've already created. Just to quit your job without a strategy in place, I don't think, maybe I would have done that at 22 years old, right? Because I had the whole future ahead of me. At 50 years old, I'm not thinking that way anymore. So I think, hey, whatever you do, be wise. But here's also the problem with hanging on your job. There comes a point you hang on your job too long, it becomes comfortable, and you end up putting your dream off to the side. And listen, Henry Thoreau said, most of us live a life of quiet desperation. Don't put your dreams aside, but you got to have the discipline and the vision to work after hours, during your lunch breaks and so forth, pouring into the secondary activity until your gut tells you that it's time to step out and go in that direction. Do I think in the last 4 years through the pandemic and so forth, was that a great pivot point? Absolutely, for a lot of people. In fact, I'm 6 chapters in, so hopefully next year I'll finish it, sometime in 2025. 6 chapters in on my next book, which is called Lose Your Job, Win Your Life.
I love it. When can I send a testimonial?
Okay, I'll be getting yours there, Patrick.
Lose your job, win your life.
Yeah, lose your job, win your life. And so
you got to buy that.com if you haven't bought it already.
Oh, I've had it for 15 years. So,
I love it.
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So the idea is, I believe that we've all come to earth in part to become the measure of our creation and to find out who we really are, to find out our calling, find out what strengths and talents we have that oftentimes go buried because of a job. I don't think listen, Bob Millard would always say, fall in love with what you do and you never have to work a job in your life. Well, sometimes that's difficult. If you have a hard boss or someone that's tearing you down, first of all, I don't suggest that you stay there. You probably do need to make a change, and many people do. But I will say, on the outside of making that change, if you're filling your mind with positive material, associating with good people, doors will open. Resources will open. It's the abundance mindset. The universe will give you opportunities. They might be delayed, right? Because delayed gratification, they might be delayed for a month. And you're like, TJ told me that a door would probably open. It will, but you got to stay long enough that you prove to the universe you're committed. And doors will open. But just be wise when you make that change. Any of you that have already taken that route, one of the best things you can do, for me, if you want to get it as a speaker or a consultant or something, is do exactly what Patrick is teaching and consulting on, and that is become an author. I think we used to joke around about it, Patrick, many years ago, that a book is your golden business card. And here's the reality. It really is. That if you think you can, changed my life. I didn't say this in the beginning. The moment that book came out, I got a call from Legal Shield. Because I had asked the founder to endorse the book, and he called me one day on a Friday. He said, "This is Harlan Stonecipher." I said, "Hello, this is TJ." I said, "Nice to hear your voice." I had sent him the book. And what I had done the previous month was call him every day and ask his assistant, "Has Harlan read any of my book yet? Has Harlan read any of my book yet? Has Harlan read?" And my wife thinks I probably did it like 86 times. So he calls me on a Friday. He says, "TJ, you're on a speakerphone. And TJ, you're sitting here with several other executives. and I want to give you 2 A pluses. I said, sir, I was kind of taken back. I said, yes, sir, A pluses. He says, number 1, you get an A plus on persistence. Bruce Redwine, who was his assistant, said, you called almost every day to see if I was reading the book. Because some days I'd call, he'd say, yeah, he's on page 13. The next day I'd call, he's on page 19. Next page I'd call, he's on, right? It would just go like that. He said, the second A plus I want to give you is you have written a powerful book. And he said, for that, I'd like you to speak at our national convention next March. Would you have books available at the national convention? I said, no problem, sir. That was only about 4 months away. And this was about the time you and I were doing some work together, Patrick. And I said, no problem. How many people will be in the audience? He says, we'll have about 15 to 18,000. I said, no problem. That's great. But in my heart, my palms started to sweat because I'm like, where am I going to
pay for 15,000?
Yeah. I'm like, where am I going to pay for 15,000 books? And I called Steve, my older brother, Steve. And I said, Steve, can I borrow the money? I promise you, I'll pay you back, and I'll pay you 50 cents on every book in addition to paying you back. And he said, no problem. So he paid for those first books to get done. I spoke at the convention. My throat was raspy. It's on my YouTube channel from a lot of years ago, 20 years ago. I was a lot bigger then. And I spoke. And I think I sold every book that weekend. The line went around the convention center for me to autograph the book. And I sat there signing books. I had to have my brother pause the line because I had to run to the bathroom at one point and then come back and keep signing for 3 days. And you know what? The rest is history, because then Charlie Tremendous Jones called me and said, Amway wants a copy of your book and they want 25,000 copies. If I broker the deal, can we split it 50-50? I said, absolutely, Charlie Tremendous Jones. I'll give you 50%.
Tremendous. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Absolutely. Can you imagine the plight I'm in? But from the check I got from Legal Shield and Amway, basically, I tell you what, we were able to get out of mom and dad's house, buy our house, put the down payment on, everything worked out, and everything's kind of been history since. But I will say, other doors open when you have a book. But listen, if you're an author and you're writing a book, you got to have 10 copies. And this sounds cheesy, I get it. And we live in a different age because we have digital now. When I started, it wasn't a digital age so much. I'm telling you, you got to be hawking your book where it makes sense. Now, because if you're paying for the book to get printed, or you're buying it off of Amazon or something like that for yourself, for your own book to get copies, depending on how you're doing it, you're just not going to give it randomly to people, right? That's too expensive. But if you're meeting with someone that's relative to your goals, your aspirations, or for me, in my case, it was leaders inside companies. And if I was sitting on the airplane, I would always take one with me in case I met someone that this might be a tool that can be a door opener. And that's happened hundreds and hundreds of times. So
love it.
Yeah.
Love it. So the challenge of building your information empire industry, obviously there are pains, traumas, obstacles along the way. So I want to talk a little bit about pain, and I want to ask you, how can people get better to challenges or emotional pain? How can people get past that?
Lower your expectations. All pain has to do with expectations. Now that's a fine line. I get it. I think
maybe lower your expectations for other people, but don't lower your expectations for yourself. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think the spirit of that is true. Here's what I see about life. And this is a theory of mine. It's not truth. It seems like high achieving people, I do a lot of research on an individual. I do an assessment on them that takes them 37 pages in depth. And when I coach an executive, it's very intense. I find out that most leaders, 70% of them, are very hard on themselves. And that hardness being hard on themselves is what drives them toward excellence. Because why? They're always trying to prove their worth to themselves. I argue that high performers tend to have high, crisp expectations, but happy people tend to have low expectations. And that does not mean low moral expectations. That does not mean low, these are my goals expectations. It means being more flexible. It's understanding the nuance of the universe a little bit more instead of being so zero focused. So my argument would be, there's a time to be zero in focus, and I can go there, but there's also a time to relax and not let things bug you, not let things get you down. Don't let that rejection define you. Why would you do that? They don't even know you. So don't let that, hold you back from doing it. You go forward with the expectation that you're going to succeed. And when you don't, you're flexible. That's all I'm saying. So lower the expectations sometimes like you said, of the other people and the response to you. Why? Because you only have control over you. You don't have control over someone else's response. So let that go. Make sense?
Yep, absolutely. So you talk about why people are dissatisfied, unhappy at work, but what can people do to find more joy?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have found that there's more than this, but generally there are 5 things employees or workers need to feel in order to find bliss at work, to find bliss at their job. Number 1, a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose is vital. Number 2, and by the way, sense of purpose is when I speak to transit, like bus companies or something where they transport people, I often say, you're not in the transportation business, you're in the connecting people business. When I talk to shippers, I talk about, you're not just into shipping boxes, you're into saving lives, because you're shipping medical equipment, you're shipping my books and Patrick's books and others' books. You're sending those books to people that hopefully can impact their lives in a positive way. So a sense of going deeper and finding a sense of purpose about your job. What are you really doing? Number 2, and this is critical for motivation too, a sense of progress. If you're not growing, you are dying inside. So what are you doing to create stress? So I happened to interview on my podcast Whitney Johnson, and she wrote a book, became a New York Times bestseller, Disrupt Yourself. Powerful interview if you get a chance to watch it or listen to it. It's a powerful interview. And one thing she talked about in that interview was something called the S-curve. And this is vital for anyone maybe leaving their job, not feeling happy at their job or whatever, and it has to do with progress. She told me, and I did some research on a man by the name of Christensen. I forget his first name. He's since passed away, but he worked with Whitney Johnson. And he said there's 2 types of motivation factors. There are hygiene factors, which are how much time off do I get? What's my salary? How many breaks do I get throughout the day? Those are hygiene factors. And what he argues, he's a Harvard professor. He was a Harvard professor. He says your happiness will only go up so far, but it caps off on hygiene factors. All those peripheral little decisions, how much time I get off and so forth. He says where real growth happens past that cap is recognition and growth, right? Recognition and growth. So number 1 is a sense of purpose. That's vital for your job. Fall in love with what you do. Find a reason to love it. Number 2, sense of progress. Number 3 is going to be autonomy. Autonomy. No micromanaging, right? Some people use micromanaging as a way to control. Now, if you're an underperformer, then go figure out the score. Go figure out your job better, and do better in the future, so you don't have to be micromanaged. But some leaders, out of control, feel like they have to micromanage people. Here's the reality: a high percentage of the population, if you tell them what needs to be done and you give them the tools, they'll get it done. Just trust them to get it done. So autonomy is really important. But in that is also the fourth thing that has to be in play is collaboration. We were not built as human beings to be alone. We are social beings, and being able to collaborate with others, draw from each other's, learn from each other's, give our opinions, and hopefully those opinions will be valued, is really vital at work. Okay, so if any leaders are listening to that, hey, get in real conversations with your people and ask them what they think. That's really important. And then the fifth one is celebration. That goes back to Clayton Christensen was his name, with Whitney Johnson. The recognition. It's celebration. Celebration. You have to recognize when people do things right. Praise pays. And I will add one thing here. You want to reward the effort. Reward the effort, not just the end result. Every milestone that you cross, you should have a little pat on the back, a little recognition for that. And I would say the first recognition you should give is for yourself. We are definitely, as human beings, too hard on ourselves. Give yourselves a little bit more of a pat on the back. This is vital for just living a happy life and achieving more. Now, I get it. 5% of you listening to this don't need recognition to do a good job. And you're a leader in a company and you already do a good job, but you don't need recognition. Why? Because you have figured out that you get your personal recognition by getting the result. And that's okay. Okay, that's fine. You don't need the recognition. But 70% of you need the recognition. That's what the research shows. So those are the 5 things to create bliss at work.
From stage and in your books, you talk about listening to your impressions. What does that mean, listening to your impressions?
Social media, with academic education, we've become beings that are very data-driven. That is important. But being balanced is also important. So there's a paradox. You have data and you have intuition. Some leaders are really good at data, but they don't really listen to their intuition. Why? Because they feel they're so practical, they feel most comfortable. And especially if you're highly analytical, this is going to be probably true for you. They tend to just rely on the data. But the data doesn't spell all of it out. Some of it comes on feelings. So you have to feel your way through life. And I don't think in this day and age today that we listen to our guts, that we listen to our feelings to help answer some of those questions that the data can't provide sometimes. And so what does that look like? Random things that seem crazy. I'll give you a crazy one. You want to hear a crazy one? I'll give you a crazy one. My son, the same one that was a football player, was also a wrestler and went to state 3 times in Washington State. Well, his junior year, he was wrestling, and 2 weeks in, he had already gone to state and so forth, so he was looking really good. But after his football season, he started wrestling, and someone broke his ankle on the mat. He was out for 2 months, but he thought, I'm going to come back and I'm going to dominate. I'm still going to get back to state, right? Can't is not a word we use, right? Kind of a thing. So he went to the pool. He swam a lot. He did everything he could do to strengthen that up toward the end of the 2 months. And then he said, okay, I'm going to go back. It's going to be sensitive, but I'm going to go back. And the only one that would coach him, the coaches he had at the school he went to, were 2 brothers that were all-American wrestlers. And so the only one that would wrestle him were the coaches, because they knew to protect the ankle, because a week later he would go into districts. So he kind of got a little bit more his physicality ready for districts, and he won first place in districts. He goes to regionals up in Lake Stevens, who is known for great wrestlers. And he tells me the Friday night before they go up on Saturday for the tournament, Dad, I'm really worried about this. And I said, hey, well, let's just say a prayer that you'll be protected, that you'll have the confidence, that you won't dwell on everything that will go wrong, but let's dwell on everything you can do to go forward. And hopefully they won't grab and yank on your ankle. All right. So that next morning, I take him to the school. They all get on the bus. And of course, I go to the tournament. So I'm driving my car behind the bus. And this voice comes to me. Hey, TJ, you should text Bryce and you should tell him if he pours the water from his bottle into the cap of the bottle and drinks it, he'll get first place at regionals today. I said, that is stupid. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No different than and I'll get back to it, but no different than my son when he was 10 years old said, Dad, I get this feeling, be careful, there might be a wreck coming up. And lo and behold, a couple miles from my house as I was taking a left, right in front of us, a wreck happened. You can't, these are mysteries of life. You can't quantify it always. Well, going back to Bryce drinking the water from the cap. I texted it to him. He didn't respond. We get to the gym. He weighs in. He then comes and sits down in the bleachers where I'm sitting already waiting for an hour later, the tournament would start because we were there early. And he always would sit in front of me in the bleachers. He wasn't embarrassed as a teenager. He would sit in front of me. My legs would be a little bit open and he would just lean back into me. So his head would be right in back of me. And I went down and I said, hey, Bryce, I'm just wondering, did you drink the water from the cap? And he turned up to me and he said, of course I did, Dad. And you know what? He won first place at that tournament. He went into state and ended up with winning second in state that year. So when I say about part of this will come to your job and when to leave your job, or what's my next avenue? What's the next door that can open? Listen, wake up a little earlier in the morning. Read something positive to get the juices going in your brain. And then just sit and meditate. I don't mean formally meditate. I don't think I've formally meditated in my life, except on one podcast where I had the authors of Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and she had me in the middle of the podcast do a meditation. That was the first actual meditation I've done. But I do think slow down, listen to your gut, listen to your thoughts long enough, 15, 20 minutes, that you start having ideas that come into your head, and then write those ideas down. And you will watch in the next day, 2 or 3 days, some opportunity or door will open around those thoughts. And the next step is to act on those crazy impressions. Just act on them. And you know what? Something comes from them. I'm telling you. That's my belief anyway.
Love it. Love it. Our guest, TJ Hoisington, the website, greatnesswithin.com, the international bestseller, If You Think You Can, and then the second book, The Secrets of the Slight Edge. How and where can people pick up a copy of both of your books and all the other books you've done?
Wherever books are sold, If You Think You Can is everywhere. The Secret of the Slight Edge is everywhere. The Return to Robinson Island, a lot of people don't know this. I went off and did a personal goal outside of my business, and it was to write the first sequel of Swiss Family Robinson. And so I wrote a sequel of Swiss Family Robinson, and I think it actually has more reviews, straight 5 reviews or something like that, on a 416-page book, which takes the Swiss Family Robinson classic novel and speeds it up about 10 years, and then what's happening with the family, or 15 years, and what's happening with the family. And it is an action-packed historical fiction. And so that's another book that's out there, Return to Robinson Island. And then we obviously have training courses and so forth for companies that want to create higher performance and better results in their companies.
So they can get anywhere books are sold, or they can also learn more at greatnesswithin.com.
Yes.
Same thing for consulting and for speaking. Go to greatnesswithin.com, view your highlight video, and then get a hold of you that way.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you very much.
What's next for TJ Hoisington?
I think we're going to do a couple things. Our famous or popular Leadership Academy will go to an online version as well, so I don't have to travel as much. So in 2005, Leadership Academy, which is a 6-month process typically, or more, will be going online. So it makes it a little bit more affordable for companies that have a budget or whatever. So we'll be doing that. And then hopefully, I haven't picked the date yet, which I need to do because I'm not zeroed in focus, right? I'm distracted. I need to finish the last 5 or 6 chapters of Lose Your Job, Win Your Life. So that's probably what's next.
Fantastic. Okay, any subject matter that we didn't get a chance to talk about? Anything else that you want to share?
No. Hey, just live with integrity, right? Assume the best in people. Realize that we're all on this earth together, but hold true to your principles. Those things that you value, know what you value, and stick to those things you value, and don't cross those values. That's how you live a happy life. And we have forces around us that want to take some of our values and turn them upside down. You don't have to buy into all that stuff. So just be true, go to work on yourself. You're not competing with anybody else but yourself. That's who you're in competition with. So go just be your best.
Wow, very good. All right, this program is called the Patrick and Mary Unstoppable Author Interview Series. So the last question I ask all of our guests is to define that word. So how does TJ Hoisington define the word unstoppable?
Determination. And I would say grit. And I would say, do I have time to give a little tiny bit?
Yep, sure, go ahead.
Benjamin Bloom in the 1950s and 60s was the dean of, I don't think it was psychiatry, but he was at the University of Pennsylvania. And he did a research with all the high-performing athletes, actors, business leaders, and so forth at the time. And he interviewed them, and he interviewed the parents of those people. And guess what he found as a result? He said the high achiever had less natural gifts and talents, but he used more of what he had, or she had. What he discovered interviewing the parents would often say, actually, what's funny is it was the brother or the sister that actually had the natural gift, but they didn't use it. So understand, here's some hope for everybody. You don't have to have all the talent and the skill. You just need to be able to give more of it. And so what he found as a determining factor, what separated the high achievers from the low achievers, was determination. And years later, Angela Duckworth would work at University of Pennsylvania, and she came out with the book Grit, right? But it was all predecessory before her that it was determination or grit. That's what I would think about unstoppable.
Very good. Again, the book is If You Think You Can, The Secrets of the Slight Edge, TJ Hoisington. Go to greatnesswithin.com. From the bottom of my heart, from our sponsor, Valerie Harris, from our producer, Mary West, thank you so very much. Are you able to stick around for a few minutes of a Q&A?
Absolutely. Would love to.
All right. Let's give TJ a big hand. That was fantastic and amazing.
Nice. Okay, what'd you think, right? What a joy it was to be a guest on Patrick's podcast. You know, I've known him for over 20 years, and he's such a good guy. And I've been fortunate to learn from him over the years. I hope you got some nuggets out of this interview. I threw a lot out there, so hopefully one or two things landed on you that was helpful. And all I would say is, hey, just go out there, be the best person you can be, and may you unleash your greatness within.